Welcome to the AIMHO 365 webinar, Preparing Student Affairs for Generation Z, presented today by Dean Kennedy from Boise State University. I'm Shadeen Say from the AIMHO 365 committee. A big thank you to you, Dean, today for developing this presentation and offering to share your knowledge with the region. We will be taking questions during the presentation using the chat feature on the right side of your screen. If everyone logged on today can test the chat feature by typing in your campus name, as well as how many attendees are viewing with you today, excuse me, we'd greatly appreciate it. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the AIMHO 365 YouTube page, and that link is available on the AIMHO website. Please be checking the AIMHO website often for future webinars, as well as to submit webinar proposals. Again, a huge thank you to our presenter today. Dean, we're all yours.
Cool. Thanks, Shadeen. Just checking the chat feature. Not sure if people can hear us. I've made the mistake once of starting a webinar and my phone was muted, so I want to make sure people can hear before we move on.
It looks like they can hear us.
Okay. So Shadeen, if I can ask you, where are you looking? Because in my chat feature, it just shows my chat.
If you look under the questions tab, they're responding there.
Okay, and I must be a complete tool.
Looks like Montana State University has 6 individuals with them, and BHSU said that they can hear us. So I think we're good to go.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thanks to Shadeen for organizing this. So again, my name is Dean Kennedy, and I get to serve as the Director of Housing and Residence Life at Boise State. So this webinar is really designed to be a jumping off point to help us get a better understanding of the limited research that is out there about Generation Z, who are starting to show up on college campuses as we speak. So my hope is I can move the slideshow, which just worked. There we go. Is really by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to identify just some basic characteristics about Generation Z and what aspects of our field in particular that may need to change or adapt to meet this new generation, while also being aware that there are other generations that live with us. And then to resources where you can get some more information. So I will point out very quickly, like I'm not an expert on Generation Z. I've been fortunate to read several books. I've gone to several presentations at multiple conferences. So this is a conglomeration of information. Really, at the end of this presentation, you will likely have more questions than I've been able to provide answers for. And I'm okay with that because those questions will help you better understand the students that are on your campuses. So why talk about this generation? So there's an infographic that I think helps provide some context. So we're looking at about a quarter of students, basically approaching a quarter of our students being Generation Z up here in the next few years. So it's a growing generation. It's supposed to be a pretty big one when all is said and done. It's that quarter. So just something to be aware of. Unlike those of us on the call webinar who identify as a Generation X, which is a much smaller population, Generation Z is going to be a significant chunk of our students. So it's important to get to know them. Also, really important for us to understand that while this presentation is really focused on trying to better understand Generation Z, there are a lot of generations that are at place in our workplace. So from staff all levels across the university and in the communities in which our universities are placed, we're working with traditionalists or the Great Generation. That's what I've heard. Baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and now Generation Z. So there's a lot of different generations that are working with each other. So the programs that we offer, our philosophies, support, policies, practices, really need to be designed with these kind of constructs in mind, that there are different generations. So that it also impacts supervision, it impacts advising. In some cases, it impacts up-coaching, so as you're helping your supervisor be better at their job. So, and I'll talk about some comparisons with these just different generations a little bit later in the presentation. But this just gives kind of a really broad overview. So the traditionalists are the great generation, born at turn of the century towards the end of World War II. The baby boomers, who are largely the parents of millennials. That'll be important here in a little bit. So through the Vietnam War into the mid-60s, Generation X, kind of mid-60s to mid-70s, again, so a smaller range. So as in looking at generational literature, we're noticing that the traditionalists or great generation tend to be the parents of Gen X. The baby boomers tend to be parents of millennials who are on our campuses now. And millennials, really the latter half of the 20th century. And then Generation Z, basically they're on our college campuses now. So born 1998-ish or so. And of course, I should have said this in the beginning. When looking at generations, had this conversation with my mother-in-law over the weekend, is that like these are broad, basically constructs, stereotypes, if you will, about generations and behaviors. You can be of a certain age and identify with the characteristics of a generation in which you weren't quote unquote born. So please know that this whole presentation is just to give a little bit more information and context as we're working with our peers, our supervisors, and students who are living on our campuses. All right, so just jumping right into kind of generations. So again, the context. So I'm going to start with baby boomers because from a college student perspective, many baby boomers, like they're the parents of the millennials, which I shared already. So from a philosophy perspective, and this is really important to better understanding millennials, is like post-World War II, there's a lot of financial security in the United States. We had just won a war. A lot of certain people in the military were going to school afterwards. The kind of the nuclear family was starting to transition into the American dream. So more, both sets of parents were working. And if you had the ambition to succeed, like you would do so. So you basically, if you work, like you will be rewarded. And that's where the like White House, picket fence, 2.2 kids, like more resources to do more things comes into play. And again, that's really important in a moment with millennials. So Generation X, again, you can see the date ranges ish. The big piece about this generation is this was the first generation in history where both parents, if there were two parents involved, started working. So the concept of latchkey kids, which is basically a kid coming home like K through 12, both parents are working or doing other things. So there's a key that is hidden somewhere, and that's how that child gets into the house. So not growing up around a lot of parents because parents were working like during the days. So this generation tends to be a little bit more cynical, skeptical, pragmatic. Another thing that is really important about this generation, for Generation X, is the 2008 recession is really hit during kind of the prime earning years for many of these people. So at this point in their lives, careers, they may have had multiple jobs, but in the mid-2000s, they had been I guess in our world, like assistant associates, directors, in jobs for several years, managers, and they were losing jobs, losing homes. So just being aware of what that looks like, that is also very important for the Generation Zers, which I'll talk about in a moment. So then millennials, again, the baby boomers, largely the parents from our millennial generation. Many of us on the phone call are largely familiar with some of the characteristics of this population. So they're used to a really strong support system. If you remember the baby boomers, if you work hard, like you will be rewarded. So like baby boomers are really supporting their kids to be successful. Many of them are seeing that like they're entitled. So because my parents have basically told me since I was a kid since I was a child that I'll do great things, that I'll do great things. So not necessarily connecting having to work hard for that. A lot of millennial students depend on financial assistance from their family. So whether they're in college or not, but from a college context, that's really important, especially as loans are getting stretched thinner and thinner from the federal government. This generation tends to be a little bit more confident than past generations, and largely that's the messages that they grew up with, that they can do it. And the last thing, I'm sure many of you have seen this before, that everyone gets a trophy comment or philosophy. So I talk with students about athletic competitions in their K through 12 schools where everybody got a ribbon. The students that are able to do their homework over and over again, take tests multiple times. There's several aspects of our K through 12 system throughout the United States, which basically allows everybody to succeed, like even though they may not try very hard. So that brings us to Generation Z. So I'm going to run through some basic traits, and then if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat feature. And if you need to, feel free to use the chat feature now. So looking at 6 distinguishing traits from Generation Z, probably the biggest and most visible one is about the value for diversity and what that looks like, and that should not be new information for any of us. So this generation coming into college, there's been a 400% increase in multiracial marriages over the past 30 years, 50% increase in multiracial youth just in the last 18 years. So from a visible perspective, especially skin tone wise, there's just an increase in diversity, visible diversity. I'd also say veteran status, individuals with different abilities, both physical impairments, learning impairments, like that is impacting like how we view the world. So in the last census, so 55% of the population in the United States is white. So, and I'm sure you've seen this as well over the next few years. Like white in the United States is going to be a minority. So the good thing is that our students are seeing that and they're expecting that. So from our role in Housing and Residence Life, how do we make sure that our staff reflects the population of students and students' needs like when they're coming onto campus. So another thing about the Generation Zers is they tend to be very, very pragmatic. And if you go back to the Generation Xers, who tend to be the parents of this population, there's some similarities. So from a, I guess, overall perspective, 71% expect to experience failure before achieving success. So that is very different from millennials, who were told from the day they were born that you will be great. So this generation tends to be a little bit more basically prepared to work harder. And 57% would rather save money than spend it. That has really significant implications for housing on college campuses. Some of you may have seen some of the trends that the glamorous lifestyle of off-campus housing complexes with lazy rivers and huge workout facilities and hot tubs. Like these students, the students that are coming to college right now, don't necessarily want to pay for that. So that's something to be aware of and be aware of on your campus. 90% of Generation Z parents assign them chores. So the generation of students that are starting to come into college, they're more familiar with doing work. So that's homework, getting a job, a second job, maybe a third job. So we're probably going to see increases in students working, not necessarily to pay for lavish lifestyles, which is a little bit more of a millennial trend, but working because that's what they're familiar with. So as you think about your staffing structure, are there more ways to include more students or student staff positions in the work that you do? Because there's likely going to be more students who will want to do that level of work. This generation tends to be more socially responsible than other generations in the past. In particular, 26% of students kind of late high school are currently volunteering. The survey was given a year ago, so pretty recent. And that number for millennials in that time frame was like 19%. So it was a pretty decent jump in the number of students who are volunteering, whether it's being required through a high school program or they want to. But either way, like there's that service component. And what does that mean for us? How are we connected to service learning departments on our campuses? How do students that live on campus feel that they can give back to the community, however that is defined? So 76% are concerned about impact. So I have a glaring result. Yesterday, I just got my Sky Factor results for our department. We did the assessment in March. So in our lowest score was sustainability. So we do a lot of sustainable-oriented things, but we don't tell our students about it. So we got dinged really hard because students want us to be more sustainable, and they want to know about what things we're doing that is sustainable. 60% of students want their job to impact the world. So really important to be aware of the student population and how the work that they do, they want to be a greater impact outside of their immediate world. So this generation is very loyal to their causes. Just from a sustainability perspective, that is something that is really important to them. They also tend to be more compassionate, so compassionate for the planet, compassionate for other people, which is connected to that 60% want their job to impact the world. Like they want to make a difference in the lives of others outside of their immediate friend groups, where some of the trends we're seeing with some millennials is that desire to impact either furthering my career or the people that are closest to me. Like that sphere is starting to grow. With the sphere of influence is starting to grow with Generation Z students. So this generation more driven as a population than previous generations. So for example, 80% of Generation Zers that were surveyed said that they thought they were more driven than their peers. This has implications for us from a housing and residence life perspective in terms of competition. So what do leadership opportunities look like within our offices and the offices that we're connected to on our campuses? We're likely going to see more students be in more leadership positions that are competing for more leadership positions. 62% would rather start their own companies than work for one. So I believe in the past 2 or 3 years, there's several 12, 13, 14-year-olds who have designed using 3D printers, have designed either new devices, programs, computer applications that can help either family members or people in their community. So that's something that we just need to be aware of. So there's a lot of leaders that are basically infusing themselves into the fabric of the housing and residence life world. And then in addition, the research out there now anyway shows that Generation Z students want to find jobs that match their personality. So more concerned about values, morals, and finding a position that is in line with who they are as a people or as a person, as opposed to a job for a job's sake or a job that's going to make money. So that is going to have some implications for us. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out over time. This generation is also more optimistic. which is interesting if you look at Generation X, who are largely this Generation Z's parents, tend to be more cynical and pragmatic. And if you think about it, I had to dive deeper into the reading to figure this out. But this generation, Generation Z, is so inundated with negative information through social media, TV, radio, paper, that, like, because of that, they're saying that they see that there is hope. Like, with all of the negative things that are going on in their world, they seek out hope, trying to make a difference. Some of the other things that I've mentioned already. So, which is exciting that 65% of this generation is hopeful about the future. And I say that knowing, so this data also came from about a year and a half ago. It would be interesting to see, given leadership changes in the United States over the past couple of years, like what implications that has on Generation Z. And really, like, time will tell. And then lastly, and this should not surprise anybody, like, this generation is more plugged in than any other generation that is out there. So, for example, 44% check social media hourly. My guess is you probably have students and some staff members that probably beat that. So from a, I guess, logistics perspective, and you all know this already, with the top device being their smartphone, we have to be super aware of any message that we are sharing with students has to be visible on that, 2.5 by 5 or 6 inch screen, which has huge implications for what content we're sharing, when, through what media, to who. And that impacts some of the generational impacts I mentioned earlier. So also, this generation is starting to watch less TV. So they may be watching more Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. But from a TV perspective, this is important to know. I had a conversation with our foundation and advancement office, and this had huge implications for them, because as they're looking to help us raise money for our living learning programs, like, they had a pretty robust TV presence on local, like, cable channels. But this generation not paying attention to that. So we'll likely see that continue. So how many baby boomers, Generation Xers, millennials are looking at TV as a way to, I guess, intake information. So that has implications for how we promote the goods and services, recruit students to live on campus. So this not new information. Social media and devices are ways for people to make meaning of their world. Scarily, 7 is the average number of internet-ready devices owned by Generation Z students. If you think of, like, watches and game systems, phones, computers. So this generation is connected in every way, shape, or form, which you all know already. So 92% own smartphone. I think what is really important, I would say, especially for institutions who serve like underrepresented or rural populations, like, we have to be aware that 8% of students that were surveyed did not have ready access to a cell phone. That has implications when we look at access to programs, access to applying to live on campus, access for applying to be in a job in housing and residence life in our department. So just something to be aware of. 62% check email daily, not necessarily university email. So that's largely a conversation, or likely a conversation for you to have with your university communication offices or student affairs offices, auxiliary offices. When it comes to communication, like, how is what message is being shared with this generation, again, compared with students who identify as millennials, students who identify as Generation X or boomers. But again, something to be aware of. YouTube, a lot of students, and you know this already, so if you don't have a YouTube channel, should you get one? if you get one, create one. What does that mean for content? How is content monitored? So that, again, implications for you, marketing departments across your university, what does that look like? But we live in a very video heavy messaging world, which should not surprise anybody. So if you can create, 10, 15, 20-second videos of the different room types that you have on campus, the different residence hall living experiences that you have on your campuses, like that will likely get some traction because of that video piece, which may mean that you need a YouTube channel or some other way to get videos into students that you're trying to recruit into their hands. Social media, this doesn't surprise anybody. Students are on social media all the time. Again, I would point out the gap in this figure is 9%. So students that are not using social media. So again, what does access look like? And how can you check in with your students that live on campus to see like how they are processing through making meaning of social media? So Facebook is being used on a regular basis to stay connected. Largely in talking with our students, which I would recommend touching base with the students who are on your campuses, is how do they use Facebook? So talking with our student staff, they basically use Facebook every day those that use Facebook every day, just to check in on like their longer distance friends. So those attending other colleges, universities, possibly like friends or family that may be using Facebook, but it's a really quick jump onto Facebook, open the app, kind of scroll through the people they care about but don't see on a regular basis. It's not how they communicate with their friends or the people that live in their communities. That's through other avenues like Snapchat. Again, this should not surprise anybody. But really important, like as we look at programming, how RAs are interacting with residents, policies, procedures that we have in our offices, like how are we communicating that to who, knowing that we have Generation Z, millennials, Gen Xers, possibly baby boomers that are living on our campuses. So also something that's important to know is that text messaging, when you all shouldn't be surprised at this, they're willing to receive text messages from universities. So in the past, millennials and before tended to keep their text messages a little bit more private, so just between friends. But now we're seeing an increase of students that are okay with just getting a text message. So do you have a Google Voice account? When you're reaching out to students who are past due from rent, they have an outstanding application that they need to finish. Your office has tried several times to call them. Email is obviously going into a void somewhere. How do you send a text and receive text messages back without asking somebody in your office to use their personal phone number? So that has some pretty big implications for us. And then from a Twitter perspective, I just came from Akuai, and I think Twitter was the official back channel. We as a field are going to need to look at what this looks like because fewer and fewer students are following Twitter. So staff members may be following Twitter, so how we're connecting to our staff may be a Twitter thing. But yeah, again, like what is your student population? What is your staff population? Who is using what versions of social media? All being said, from a really early age, this doesn't surprise anybody, like our students coming to college campuses are super connected, both from a device perspective and they're on Wi-Fi all the time. So how robust is the Wi-Fi network throughout your residence halls, common areas in the buildings, common areas outside of the buildings? Like how can you provide an opportunity for people to be plugged in while also developing the basically interpersonal relationships? So I just threw a ton of information at you and wanted to see if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about anything that I shared. And Shadeen, I may need your help. I'm not seeing the questions feature.
Yeah, I can help with that.
Okay.
One question that is posted in your research or your workings on your campus, have you dive into some of these stats a little bit more and kind of understand your campus population? And if so, how did that work?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you. So with all of the technology pieces, so Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Pinterest, GroupMe, we use the Sky Factor survey, formerly EBI, to find out like what are the methods. We asked two questions. One, let's see if I get this right. So one, like how do you find out about events that are on campus? And we ask them to rank order, like the social media. That's right. There's the how you want to find out about things, and how do you, or where do you go to find information? And we basically it's the same set of social media options for both questions. And that has helped us see, like, we don't use Twitter at all. We do still post information on Facebook because we have a pretty decent number of followers. Pinterest, we have individual social media accounts for each of our residence halls because that's where a lot of students are connected. And then GroupMe, which is causing a nightmare for our general counsel's office because they don't like the agreement. But our RAs each have a GroupMe account for their residents because that's how they've said they want to be connected to events that occur on campus. So yeah, the webinar will be available for you all. Anybody who emails me, I'll send you this webinar if you want to share it with other people in your department. But you can take each of those, the infographics that I shared, and whether it's through Sky Factor or some other assessment, bring in some focus groups. So think of all of the different social media. But the two questions I would ask is, like, how do you get, how do you seek out information, and how do you want to be informed of information? Because those are, in our experience, those have been two pretty distinct avenues by which students want to be informed of stuff. So, any other questions? Sorry, I can't see that thing.
Another question that came in is working with your administration, so either your board or your cabinet, and forecasting the Generation Z population on your campus. Are you looking at any procedural or policy changes to implement on your campus?
That's a great question, and my hope is a bunch of you will laugh. So we were actually using the research on Generation Z to push ahead electronic signature policy, which is basically from the 1990s. But having this data that I've shared with you so far has been compelling for us to move more processes online and through a mobile platform. I would say another thing that we have done based on just this research is we worked with our web communications Office of Information Technology team to redesign our website, which should not be new information for anybody, but it's going to be much more mobile friendly. So for some of the departments on campus who liked what they did with WordPress, this information has been helpful for marketing, communication, information technology, web design, to be able to basically be able to say that we need to change the format by how we're sharing information through our websites. And actually, I'd probably say another 3 or 4 months or so, you're totally welcome to come to the Boise State homepage, because it's going to look very different than it does right now. It's going to basically look like Google. So like lots of videos and very, very few not search functions, very few stories. But yeah, based largely on on Google. Trying to think some other things. We're also looking at, especially if you're looking at new housing, I would definitely dive into the Generation Z information about what you're constructing, because we're looking at potentially adding beds in the next 3 to 5 years. So the construction of those buildings, price point, number of students who are living together, number of students per bathroom, that is changing. Like those 3 factors are changing from the millennial population and the construction that has happened over the past 18 to 20 years. So I would definitely look into your student population and ask them what they want and what they need, because you may find you'll get different answers. So those are 3 examples. But if you have specific questions, please don't hesitate to email me, and I'll let you know other things if it's directly related to your campus. Cool. Thanks, Shadeen. Any other questions?
It doesn't appear that I have other questions coming in at this point. Okay. Again, thank you, Dean, for taking the time to share your knowledge in this area. The association really appreciates what you do for our members. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be posted on the AIMHO 365 YouTube page, and that event link will be available on the aimho.org website for future review. So please make sure, like as Dean was saying, reuse it, reshare it, and let's get this information out. And then be on the lookout for future webinars by checking the AIMHO 365 page on the AIMHO website. At the close of this webinar, there will be a quick online survey that will appear on your screen. If you don't mind taking that, we'd greatly appreciate it. And again, a huge thank you to you, Dean, for your presentation today. Have a great day, everyone.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.